The street was loud that evening, the kind of loud that made people keep walking. Lucas Bennett was almost past her when the woman reached out and caught his wrist. "Can you carry me for a while?" He stopped, not because of the question, because of her eyes tired in a way that went past one bad day, a way that looked like years. Seconds later, he was carrying a stranger through a crowd that refused to look up, and when she finally told him where to stop, nothing about his life stayed the same. The rain had stopped an hour ago, but the sidewalk still held that wet shine, reflecting brake lights and storefronts in long red streaks. Lucas Bennett walked through it the way he walked through most things, steady, unhurried, already thinking about the next item on the list. His jacket was zipped, halfway his phone was in his hand, and a thin crease sat between his eyebrows, the kind that had been there so long he forgot it was a mood and not a feature. He was 38 and had grown into that age without noticing. Construction engineer by title site, supervisor by temperament, he spent his days solving other people's mistakes on drawings that weren't his. After work, he picked up groceries, answered emails, and went home to a quiet apartment where no one expected a conversation. He had been on his own for a few years now, and solitude had become a kind of discipline, something he maintained the way other men maintained a car. That Thursday evening, he was walking back to the parking garage on 5th, the one with the broken ticket machine, thinking about a change order his foreman had buried under a stack of receipts. The city moved around him in its usual pattern: office workers on phones, couriers weaving between them, a street musician packing up a cracked guitar case. Nobody looked at anyone. That was the rule, and Lucas had always respected it. He was almost past her when she spoke. "Excuse me." The voice was soft, but it cut through the noise because it was aimed directly at him. He slowed, half-turned, already preparing the practiced, almost smile he used for strangers. She was sitting on the edge of a concrete planter, one hand braced against the rim, the other hovering above her right ankle like she was afraid to touch it. A canvas tote leaned against her hip, heavy with something that looked like folded uniforms. "I'm sorry," she said. "I wouldn't ask. It's just, I don't think I can make it to the next block." Lucas glanced past her instinctively the way anyone does when a stranger speaks. He expected to see a friend, a partner, somebody she was already with, somebody he could hand the moment to. There was no one, just the crowd flowing around her like water around a stone. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Twisted it on the curb 2 blocks back. She tried a small smile. It didn't reach her eyes. "I thought I could walk it off. I can't." Her name was Elena Shaw, though he wouldn't know that for another few minutes. Right then, she was just a woman in a navy cardigan that had been washed too many times, with hair pulled back in a way that said she hadn't looked in a mirror since morning. There was a small white apron folded at the top of her tote, and another one below it, different fabric, different job. "Can I call someone for you?" Lucas said. He kept his voice level the way he did on site when a young worker was about to do something dangerous. "My phone died 2 hours ago," she said. "And there isn't anyone to call anyway." She said it simply the way a person states the weather. Then her eyes lifted to his, and he caught what he would later describe to no one as the worst part of the whole encounter. She was not desperate. She was not dramatic. She was just tired in a way that had stopped being emotional and had become structural, like a beam bearing more weight than it was built for. "Can you carry me for a while?" For a second he thought he had misheard. He almost laughed the quick, nervous laugh men use when they want to convert confusion into distance. The laugh didn't come out, because her expression didn't shift. She wasn't joking. She wasn't flirting. She was making a request the way a person asks for directions because she had run out of other options. He looked around again. A woman in a blazer walked past eyes on her phone. A man in a delivery vest swerved around them without slowing. 2 college-age girls glanced, registered the situation, and kept moving as if witnessing it would obligate them. Nobody stopped. Nobody offered. The city did what cities do. It kept going. Lucas did not consider himself cold. He considered himself careful. There was a difference, and he had spent years making sure he stayed on the right side of it. He gave money when asked. He held elevators. He did not, as a rule, involve himself in other people's collapses. He had learned early that involvement cost you things you could not always afford. "Ma'am," he said, and then regretted the word because it sounded like a dismissal. "Let me flag a cab. I'll pay for it. I live 4 blocks that way." She nodded vaguely uptown. "By the time a cab gets here and turns around, I'll have been sitting here 20 more minutes. I've been sitting here half an hour already." She tried the smile again. Nobody stopped. That was the line that did it, not the ankle, not the request. The word, nobody. He became aware suddenly of how many people had passed her, of how many had seen a woman sitting alone on a planter plainly in pain, and made the small internal calculation that had let them walk on. He had been one of those people technically, until she had chosen him out of the crowd for reasons he would never fully understand. His phone buzzed in his hand. He looked down. It was work. He let it go to voicemail. 4 blocks, he said. 4 blocks. "You're sure?" "I'm not sure about anything today," she said, "but I'm sure I can't walk it." Lucas slid his phone into his jacket pocket. He looked at her tote, then at her ankle, then at the slow river of strangers passing them both. Something moved in his chest that he didn't have a good word for. It wasn't pity. Pity would have let him keep walking. It was closer to recognition, the quiet, unwelcome understanding that he had probably passed 100 Elenas in his life without turning his head, and that each of them had been waiting for someone to stop. "Okay," he said. She blinked. It was the first time her face did something other than endure. Really? Really? He crouched in front of the planter, keeping his back to her, the way he'd seen his own father do once a long time ago for reasons he didn't have time to remember now. "Put the bag over your shoulder first. Keep your weight centered. If your ankle touches anything, tell me." She made a sound that was half laugh, half exhale. "You sound like you've done this before." "I've carried furniture," he said. "People are easier. They hold on." He felt her hand settle on his shoulders, hesitant, then firmer. Her arms came around his neck without pressing. She was lighter than he expected, and that fact bothered him in a way he couldn't examine right then. He stood slowly, making sure of his knees, and adjusted until she was steady against his back. "Which way?" he asked. "Up 5th, then right on Linden." He started walking. The crowd parted around them, not out of courtesy, but out of surprise. Heads turned. Lucas felt the heat climb into his face and settled his jaw against it. He kept his eyes forward. He kept his pace even. He told himself, with the quiet discipline he had built his whole adult life on, that he would drop her at her door, wish her well, and go home. He believed that walking up 5th with a stranger's breath warm against the collar of his jacket. He believed it for about 6 more minutes. The first block was the easiest. Lucas walked at a steady pace, shoulders square, keeping his eyes on the gap between pedestrians instead of on the pedestrians themselves. Elena weighed almost nothing, but she was a living weight, and that was a different thing than a box or a bag. Every time she shifted, he felt it. Every time she tried not to shift, he felt that too. A man in a gray coat slowed down to look, then sped up as if curiosity were a thing he had to earn back. A young woman holding a coffee cup lifted her phone and lowered it again, changing her mind. The weight of those glances settled on his neck without stopping there. He was not a man who attracted attention, not by choice, not by build. He had spent his adult life being the one who gave instructions, not the one who got looked at. Now he was walking up a public street in the middle of rush hour with a stranger on his back, and there was no version of that which did not look strange. "I'm sorry," Elena said quietly near his ear, "about the attention." "It's fine." "It's not. But thank you for saying it." He didn't answer. He crossed at the light matched his stride to the flow and told himself to keep breathing evenly. Somewhere behind his ribs, a small voice was already asking whether 4 blocks was actually closer to 6, whether he had misjudged the weight of her by a significant margin. He shut that voice down the way he shut down the voice at work that asked whether a beam was really going to hold. It was going to hold because he had already said it would. Elena did not chatter. That surprised him. Most people placed in a situation this unusual would have filled the air with apology or small talk. She did neither. She gave directions in short phrases left at the pharmacy, passed the dry cleaner keep going, and otherwise stayed quiet. He realized somewhere around the middle of the second block that her quiet was not shyness. It was conservation. She did not have extra energy for conversation. She was using everything she had just to stay upright against his back. His phone buzzed again. Twice, 3 times then the pattern that meant a call. He could feel it through the fabric of his jacket pressed between his ribs and her forearm. He ignored it. It buzzed again. He ignored that too. "You can answer," she said. "I won't listen." "It's work." "It sounds important." "It's always important," he said. "That's the problem." She made a sound that might have been a laugh if she had any laughs left in her. "Yeah," she said. "I know what that sounds like." Somewhere around Linden, the sidewalk narrowed and the crowd thinned. The shops got smaller. The buildings leaned on each other a little. A dog barked from a 3rd-floor window and went quiet again. "How long since you ate?" Lucas asked, surprising himself. There was a small delay before she answered. "I had coffee at 2. "That's not eating." "I know." "What was the last real meal?" "Last night. Rice and an egg." She said it evenly without embarrassment, the way a person answers a question on a form. "Today I worked 3 shifts. I thought I'd pick something up between the 2nd and the 3rd, but the 2nd one ran long, and by the time I got out I only had 40 minutes to get across town." Lucas didn't say anything for a moment. 3 shifts. He turned the number over in his head the way he turned over numbers on a spec sheet looking for the error. There wasn't one. She had said 3, and she meant 3, and that was the whole sentence. "What kind of work?" he asked, keeping his voice level because he could tell that pity would offend her more than silence. "Breakfast prep at a diner on Grant. Lunch at a hotel kitchen downtown. Evenings, I clean offices in the Fremont building." She shifted slightly against his back carefully. "Today they asked me to cover a double at the hotel. So I did. That's why I'm late. That's why the ankle. I was running to catch the bus and I came down wrong on the curb." He absorbed that in pieces as they walked. He had been thinking of her without meaning to as a woman who had had one bad day. Now he understood that she had not had a bad day. She had had a bad life for long enough that a bad day barely registered as a category anymore. "There must be somebody," he said. "Family. A friend." "Must be," she agreed. That was all she said. She didn't explain. She didn't elaborate. She let the 2 words sit in the space between them, and he understood that the 2 words were the whole answer. There was supposed to be somebody. There wasn't. That was the story. A small thing happened inside him that he would not have been able to name if he had been asked. It was not sympathy exactly. It was a quiet rearrangement of the way he had been looking at the world. He had believed without ever putting it into a sentence that most people were fine if you let them be. That the ones who weren't fine were the ones who had made loud, visible mistakes. That the quiet ones, the polite ones, the ones who sat on planters and didn't ask for help, were fine by default. He could feel in the lightness of her against his back how wrong he had been. His phone buzzed again. This time he stopped at the corner, adjusted her gently, and fished it out with one hand. The screen showed his foreman's name, a missed call, and a text. "Need you on site tomorrow, 6 in the morning crane issue." He read it once, typed back a thumbs-up emoji, and slid the phone away. "Everything all right?" Elena asked. "Tomorrow's problem." "You're good at that," she said. Putting things in tomorrow. Habit. It's a useful habit. Until it isn't, he said, and started walking again. By the third block, his arms were burning. Not badly, not yet. But the burn was there, low and steady, the way muscles announce they have remembered they are made of tissue and not iron. His back had started to ask questions, too. He adjusted his grip twice, each time carefully, each time murmuring sorry when he felt her wince. We could stop for a minute, he said. There's a bench up there. If we stop, I won't get up again, she said. I know myself. Okay. Just a little further, I promise. He kept walking. A part of him, the managerial part, the part that ran job sites and solved other people's mistakes, noted the irony. He had agreed to 4 blocks and gotten 3, and now he was being asked gently by a woman who weighed barely anything to give her 1 more. He was a man who negotiated for a living. He had never been less capable of saying no. They turned off Linden onto a smaller street he didn't know. The streetlights here were older, warmer, throwing pools of yellow instead of the white-blue of the main roads. The houses were narrow, stacked close with small porches and mailboxes that leaned. A cat watched them from under a parked car and didn't move. Halfway down on the left, Elena said. The one with the green trim. Lucas saw it before she finished saying it. It was small, the kind of small that was not charming, only small. The paint on the green trim had cracked in places and curled away from the wood. One of the porch boards had been replaced with a piece of plywood that hadn't been painted to match. The front window was dark. There was no car in front of it. He walked up the 2 porch steps, carefully feeling for each one, conscious of her ankle every time his own foot landed. At the door, he lowered her gently. She kept one hand on his shoulder for balance. The other went into her cardigan pocket and came out with a key on a plain ring. Thank you, she said. She said it quietly without performance. I mean that. You don't have to. I do. You didn't know me. You stopped anyway. The key turned. The door opened. And Lucas, who had already decided in his head that he would say goodbye at the threshold, looked past her into the house before he could stop himself. The entry was a narrow hallway with a single bulb overhead not on. The floor was clean but scuffed, and the walls were bare in a way that wasn't minimalist, just bare. He could see into what was probably the living room. There was a folding chair, a small table, a lamp on the floor because there was no side table to put it on. An ironing board stood open in the corner, with a neatly folded uniform laid across it, ready for the morning shift he hadn't known about yet. No photos, no plants, no television, nothing on the walls. It was not the home of a person who lived in a place. It was the home of a person who returned to a place to sleep between shifts. Lucas felt something tighten in his chest. Not shock. Something slower and worse than shock. He had walked this woman 4 blocks, believing somewhere under his thinking that the 4 blocks led to a life. A messy life, maybe. A hard life. But a life. What he was looking at wasn't a life. It was a holding pattern. It was the space a person rented while they waited for something to get easier, and by the look of it, easier had been a long time coming. Come in, Elena said and caught herself. Sorry. I don't mean you don't have to. I just habit. When someone helps me, I offer them water. I don't have much else to offer. I'll take the water, he heard himself say. She looked at him and something in her face changed. Not gratitude. Something more private than gratitude. Relief maybe that he was not going to turn and disappear the way the city had been disappearing around her for longer than she wanted to count. She limped into the kitchen. He stood in the doorway because going further in felt like a decision he hadn't made yet, and listened to the small sounds of a woman who had nothing being hospitable anyway. A tap running, a glass being taken down. The quiet clink of ice from a tray that had been refilled more carefully than anything in that house deserved. He looked at the ironing board, at the folded uniform, at the canvas tote she had set down by the door, still full of the other 2. At the lamp on the floor, he thought unexpectedly of his own apartment, of the warm lamp in the hallway that turned on by itself at 7, of the refrigerator that was always at least half full, whether he wanted it to be or not, of the small life he had built around being able to afford not to notice things. He thought about how he had almost walked past her, and how the only thing that had stopped him was a hand on his wrist and 4 words. "Can you carry me?" He had always believed quietly, the way you believe the weather forecast, that people who were struggling would ask for help when they needed it, and that the rest of the time they were probably fine. Standing in that doorway with a glass of water being poured for him by a woman who had eaten rice and an egg the day before, he understood that he had been wrong in a way he could not take back. She came back with the water. He took it. Their hands did not touch, but something passed between them anyway, the way things pass between 2 people who have walked 4 blocks together without having to say very much. "Thank you," he said, and he did not entirely know which of them he was thanking. The glass was cold in his hand. Lucas stood in the narrow hallway holding water he had not known he was thirsty for, and did not know what to do with the next minute of his life. Elena had lowered herself onto the folding chair in the living room, ankle-propped on the small table face, angled toward the floor. She was not looking at him. He understood somehow that she was not looking at him on purpose. She had done her part. She had thanked him. She had offered water. Now she was waiting for the city to resume its usual shape, and for the stranger in her doorway to leave so she could go back to being invisible. He did not leave. He stood there long enough that the quiet became its own kind of pressure. He looked at the ironing board, at the 2 uniforms still folded in the canvas tote by the door, at the lamp on the floor throwing a pale circle against the wall. He thought about the years he had spent walking past versions of this house without knowing they existed. He thought about how many times, on how many evenings, he had told himself a small lie to keep walking. "Someone else will stop. She must have a ride. It isn't my business." It wasn't a dramatic thought. It wasn't a crisis of character. It was quieter than that, and worse. It was the understanding that a habit of not looking had become somewhere along the way a shape of the person he was. "You can sit down if you want," Elena said. Her voice was careful, not inviting, just fair. "The chair by the window works. Don't trust the left leg." He sat. The chair wobbled on the left leg exactly as advertised. He set the glass on the small table near her ankle, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. "How bad is it?" he asked. "The ankle." "I've had worse. I'll ice it tonight. I'll wrap it. I'll be at the diner at 4. 4 in the morning? 4 in the morning." He let that sit. He had stopped being surprised by her hours somewhere on the 2nd block, but hearing the time out loud in a room this empty did something to him he wasn't ready for. Elena. It was the first time he had used her name, and he was aware of it as he said it. "You can't keep doing this." She looked up at him then, not offended, not defensive, just honest. "I know," she said. "I'm not doing it because I think I can. I'm doing it because I don't see another door." He opened his mouth to answer and realized he had nothing ready. He was a man who solved problems for a living. He knew how to read a drawing, a budget, a soil report. He did not know how to read the quiet arithmetic of a person who worked 3 jobs and still came home to a room with a lamp on the floor. He did not have a clean number for that. He did not have a change order that would fix it. What he had sitting across from her in that borrowed quiet was the slow-breaking understanding that his whole life had been organized around not needing to solve it. He had built his small, ordered world the way a careful man builds a wall to keep the weather on the outside. And the weather, it turned out, had faces. It had names. It had ankles that twisted on curbs, and cardigans that had been washed too many times. "I'm not going to pretend I know what would help," he said finally. "I don't want to insult you with the wrong thing." "That's already a kinder sentence than most," she said. "Can I do something small?" It wasn't a question exactly. Something that isn't a favor, something practical. She looked at him for a long moment. He could see her weighing it the way a person who had learned to be careful weighed everything, because every offer in her life had probably come with edges she had to check for. "I don't take money from strangers," she said quietly. "It isn't pride. It's that money from strangers always has something written on the back of it that I can't read until later. I wasn't going to offer money." "Okay, there's a place on Grant," he said. "2 doors down from your diner. They do ankle wraps cheap. I pass it every morning. I can drop one tomorrow at the counter. You pick it up when you start your shift. No conversation required. No name required. It'll be in a bag with a receipt. That's all." She considered that. He watched her consider it. He watched her look for the hook and not find one, and then slowly let her shoulders lower by a fraction of an inch. "Okay," she said. "Okay, thank you. Don't thank me, it's a wrap. It's not just a wrap and you know it." He didn't argue with her. He couldn't. They sat in that small room for another minute or two not talking, while the heater in the wall clicked on and off in a pattern that suggested it had not been serviced in a long time. He finished the water. He stood. He set the glass carefully on the small table away from her ankle, because he had learned that about her. In 4 blocks, she was a person who noticed where things were set. "I'll go," he said. "You need to sleep. Lucas." It was the first time she had used his name. He had told her at some point on the walk, he couldn't remember when. "I won't pretend I understand why you stopped. Most people don't. But I want you to know I'll remember it. Not as a favor. As a fact." "As a fact," he repeated. "Some days the fact is all that keeps a person moving. I'm telling you so you know what you gave me. It wasn't just 4 blocks. He nodded because he did not trust his voice to carry more than that. He walked to the door. He put his hand on the knob. He stopped with his back to her and said the thing he had not planned to say. "I've walked past people like you my whole life," he said quietly. "I want you to know I saw that tonight. I'm not going to forgive myself for it quickly. But I won't do it the same way again." There was no answer behind him, and he did not need one. He opened the door. He stepped out onto the porch with the cracked green trim. He closed the door behind him with the care of a man who had learned in the last 40 minutes that some doors deserved to be closed gently. The night was colder now. The street was quiet. He walked back the way he had come, slower than he had walked on the way up, because his arms were still burning and because he was no longer in a hurry to get anywhere. He passed the same pharmacy, the same dry cleaner, the same corner where he had first felt strangers watching him. He looked at the people he passed, and for the first time in a long time, he actually looked. A man sitting on a bus bench with a plastic bag between his knees. A woman at a phone crying without sound, one hand over her mouth. An older man walking a dog with a limp that matched his own. He didn't stop for any of them. He wasn't asked. But he saw them the way he had not seen anyone in years, and that was not nothing. By the time he reached the parking garage on 5th, the broken ticket machine was still broken, and his car was still waiting in the same spot. He drove home the way he drove everywhere, carefully under the speed limit, with the radio off. His phone buzzed once more on the passenger seat. The foreman again. He answered it this time. He kept his voice even. He gave instructions. He hung up. He kept driving. In the morning, he stopped at the pharmacy on Grant on his way to the site. He bought the ankle wrap. He added an apple and a bottle of water and a small sandwich wrapped in plastic. He did not write a note because a note would have been a performance, and he had promised her no performance. He paid in cash. He dropped the bag at the diner counter 2 doors down, told the cashier it was for Elena Shaw, and walked out without waiting for a reaction. He did not see her again for a long time. He did not need to. The point he understood by then had never been to rescue a stranger. The point had been to stop pretending He could not see her. He drove to the site. He climbed into the crane cab. He solved a problem other people had made. And when he walked past the planter on 5th that evening on his way back to the garage, he actually looked at the people sitting there, and at the people walking past, and at the small, quiet distance between the two. Not everyone who is tired says so. Not everyone who is falling apart looks the part. In a world where most people are working very hard to stand on their own kindness is rarely a grand gesture. It is usually something much smaller, the willingness to stop for one moment when someone else cannot take another step. That moment, the one you almost walked past, may be the one they needed in order not to give up. Sometimes the person you choose to see is the only reason they stay standing at all.